If you look up information about Bokosuka Wars, you may come across stuff like worst RPG ever, and for some reason now in 2017 there's a sequel, Bokosuka Wars II. But is this sequel worth checking out? The original Bokosuka Wars was released in 1983, and a couple of years later was ported over to the Famicom, but it never made it outside of Japan. Many years later though, with emulation and the internet, the game got a tiny following. When the game did first come out, it was pretty groundbreaking for its time. It's basically an action RPG and tactical strategy game kind of rolled into one. It looks extremely simplistic, but there is a decent amount going on in the title. The game has you in the role of a king who is leading his army against an evil enemy army. Your goal is to march across the battlefield and take out the enemies, and eventually survive long enough to get to the end and slay the enemy king. The sequel is pretty much more of the same. You're still controlling your army against the enemy, but you have a bit of a bigger battlefield this time around. The game is a bit confusing for sure once you first start it up. It'll probably take a few attempts before you have any idea of exactly what's happening. There's no tutorial, but there is a bit of an instruction manual-esque thing in the game, but it's not going to give you all the information that you necessarily need. On the battlefield, you're controlling your entire army at one time. You have 3 different types of units in your army, including soldiers, the weaker types of battlers, you have your knights, and then you have your leader category. You have to control everyone at one time, but what you can do is break it down into individual unit types, like all the soldiers or all the knights, and move them together. But unfortunately, you can't move individual units, so it's very easy to lose members of your army getting stuck on all the terrain. It's almost a game in itself just to try to keep your army together. While traveling, you'll always know how far you have left for the entire battlefield, as well as wherever the next kind of checkpoint is, usually containing like a boss fight that is potentially there, though a lot of times you're able to kind of run past those fights. The way that battles work is every enemy and character has a power level, and when they collide on the battlefield, a battle takes place. It just kind of automatically happens, and whoever ended up having the most power usually ends up being the winner, though it's not an exact science by any means. There's some variables thrown in. Every time a successful battle is won, though, the character ends up powering up a bit more. As they power up, they'll also change what type of form they are, so you can get better and elite soldiers. However, if they lose just one fight, they're dead and you've lost that unit. So there's a lot of strategy as far as trying to keep your army soldiers alive and trying to power them up. And the same goes for your leader. He has a power level, and if he runs into an enemy and ends up getting killed, it's game over and you have to start from the beginning. Making the game a bit more accessible than the original is you actually have a decent amount of members of your army right from the get-go. You basically start in jail and end up getting freed, and then you end up releasing all the other members of your army before heading off into the battlefield. It won't be long before you end up losing members of your army, but you can recruit plenty more. Unlike the original where you kind of had to just blindly walk in the trees, now you have a sprite setup that looks like a tied up soldier. You can end up freeing them to join you, or you can save them from dungeons. There's a variety of different tiles, like bricks and such, that certain units can break down, and they use these types of items to block in a group of your units. But if you're able to free them, they end up joining you and they can help you out. And that's pretty much the basics. If you're able to successfully complete a run, you'll unlock the next difficulty. Bokosuka Wars II features 5 different difficulties for you to conquer. The game does feature 2 different art styles that you can switch at any point by pressing a button. It's basically a children's nightmare art style. It's kind of creepy, as well as there's also the classic sprite work. From the technical side of things, the game ran smoothly. I didn't run into any major glitching, crashing, or slowdown of any sort. Bokosuka Wars II is available now on the PS4 and Xbox One for $14.99. It does have a Platinum Trophy on the PS4. Overall, I'm surprised there's a sequel, the Bokosuka Wars. The game is very old school. If you've ever played the original and did like it, you're going to like this one, though for a lot of modern gamers, they're just not going to get it or have any interest in trying to learn how the game works, though playing it now, it does have elements that we see in some modern indie titles, roguelike games. At $14.99, I also feel like the game is a bit overpriced. It thankfully has more music tracks than the original did and is a much more accessible title, but unless you're looking for a very old school experience, it's hard for me to recommend it that many. With everything said, if the game gets a little bit cheaper, it may be worth checking out, but as it sits right now, I'm going to be giving Bokosuka Wars an average 5 out of 10. But anyway guys, that's going to wrap up this review. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course I hope you enjoyed.